Why does Bytedance find itself in a position where it may have to offload this asset, or at least a partial sale of this asset?
Right. So, I mean, the preference for Bytedance, according to sources, is that they sell a majority stake to investors, essentially, because the other option is to divest it to another player in the media industry. And, obviously, Bytedance's preference is that they maintain control over TikTok. So that's what sources are telling us, that if they did that, they could sell a majority stake to another investor. The company's already backed by the likes of SoftBank, for example. It would also raise some cash up to $10 billion US. But as you said, it's not the only option. So other things that sources are telling us are under consideration could include just fighting back, mounting a legal challenge and saying that the US has no jurisdiction here. Because when Bytedance bought TikTok in its former self, under its former name, it was essentially one Chinese company buying another Chinese company. They didn't even apply for CFIUS approval. So the argument would follow, why would they be subject to review now? And the third option that sources are telling us about is to simply separate the US side of the TikTok business operationally, protecting it. But that's kind of the three options that are on the table, and sources say that the preference, of course, would be for none of them. But if they had to, the most likely scenario, according to sources, would be to sell to a financial investor rather than sell TikTok in its entirety to another player in the media industry.
Why do they have to do any of this? What's the problem?
So the umbrella argument here from lawmakers in the US is essentially that TikTok poses a security threat. It has somewhere between 100 to 120 million downloads here in the US. That's a lot of user data. And the concern is that it would subject US consumers to data privacy breaches, that there could be censorship coming from China, or the third option, basically, that China would somehow be able to infiltrate the app. And that it would be subject to influence from the Chinese government. TikTok made a statement in October saying that they aren't subject to the influence of the Chinese government, and that they simply operate as an independent company, especially when it comes to the US. But the language from lawmakers in the US has been strong. We had Senator Marsha Blackburn on the Tech Show just a few weeks ago saying that that TikTok was China's best detective and able to get data sent back to Beijing. Marco Rubio has called TikTok a tool of the Chinese Communist Party. So that is the concern, that essentially it is a data breach. There have been other issues as well, Guy. Essentially, a previous policy for TikTok was allowing anyone older than 13 years old to make in-app purchases. And, members of the Senate took issue with that, saying that that is far too young. And after a campaign, TikTok did eventually raise its age to 18 to make in-app purchases. But that is essentially the main argument, that there are so many US users of TikTok that it is a vulnerability and it is a security issue here in the US.
Okay, so what is the kind of the business outlook for these businesses now, Bytedance and TikTok?
Yeah, so I mean, Bytedance has a lofty $75 billion valuation, and TikTok is a major contributor to that. I already said, the sources are saying that if they were to sell just half of TikTok, it would fetch something like $10 billion, raise $10 billion in cash. It's incredibly important for the business. I think the US accounts for something like less than 20% of total downloads, and yet TikTok downloads kind of vastly outshine Instagram and Snapchat, for example, in the US. We reported in October that Bytedance was perhaps considering and preparing for an IPO. A potential sale or stake sale in TikTok might delay that process because it would raise significant funds, and it would give Bytedance a bit of breathing space to pursue other options in the meantime.